Hey everyone, it's Reed. Before we get started, I hope you'll go over to Substack and subscribe to the Homefront. We have a growing community there. I have over 13,000 subscribers, over 40,000 followers, and I hope you will consider becoming one of them. Go to Substack, the Homefront. I'll see you there, and on with the show. Welcome to the Homefront. I'm your host, Reed Galen. Today, I'm joined by Matt Bennett, co-founder and executive vice president for public affairs at Third Way, a national think tank that champions modern center-left ideas. Prior to his time at Third Way, he worked on a number of campaigns, including the presidential efforts of Michael Dukakis and Bill Clinton, where he went on to serve as deputy assistant to the president for intergovernmental affairs. He has a bachelor's degree in history from the University of Pennsylvania and a JD from the University of Virginia School of Law. Matt, welcome back.
Thanks. Great to be here.
All right. So just for the audience's benefit, right before we started recording, Rob, our producer, told me I had to put a hat on because my bald head is so shiny that it was glary. So, and my wife thought that was hilarious. So just a little levity before we get into it. So Matt, tell us, day 4 now here as we're recording this. What is life like behind enemy lines?
It's not great. It is not fantastic in Washington at the moment. First of all, it's like 6 degrees and there's, the Trump forces have flooded into the town and it's really grim here. Democrats are still in the process of kind of picking through the rubble and figuring out what the hell we do. And meanwhile, he's just turned on the fire hose and is just coming at us with everything. And so it's been a rough week.
I was driving my older daughter to school yesterday, and she said, LA's on fire. It's snowing in the South. Donald Trump is president. What else can happen?
Dogs and cats living together.
Yeah, right. It's like Passover. We're just missing frogs, locusts, and smiting of the firstborn.
It does feel that way. And we're just bracing for, the next lunatic thing that he does. I mean, did anyone see coming that he would let the guy from Silk Road out of jail after, the guy tried to hire 6 people to murder? I mean, and that's nothing. That doesn't mean anything from a policy standpoint, but it does indicate that he is just completely unbound by anything. There are no guardrails at all. And that's the scariest part.
I think not only Ross Ulbricht, who was the Silk Road guy, yes, who created, and there's a great book, I think by Andy Greenberg about that, which is definitely worth the read or the listen. But, his family had been, asking for this for a long time because the feds put him away for life. I assume, Matt, you're an attorney, as a deterrent against other people trying this. I could also see, if he's trying to kiss up to the crypto bros, that maybe Sam Bankman-Fried gets a reduced sentence. But also, if you look at how he pardoned or granted clemency to all 1,500 January 6th insurrectionists, even those who had committed violent offenses, it was one of those where picking through who would get a pardon and who wouldn't became too complicated for him because they were going to have to go through, again, more than 1,000 different people. And I think it was Axios that reported, F it, just give it to them all. Right. And I think that's the other part, too, is, he's not for complication. He's not for nuance. And so when the time comes, if it's, between designing something elegant that does things the right way or just knocking things down with a wrecking ball, he's always going to go at the wrecking ball.
100%. And look, the pardons of the J6ers was, I think, the scariest move yet. He's done a lot of terrible things on immigration and on climate and on, the federal workforce and a whole bunch of other things. But letting out from jail, not just the 14 guys whose sentences he commuted who were convicted of seditious conspiracy, but more than 300 people convicted of assaulting police officers, violently, viciously attacking police officers who were grievously wounded. And he just let them out and said that they were victims. He went on Hannity and said that these people had done nothing wrong. That sends a signal, a very, very clear and overt signal to the far right that they can do whatever the hell they want. And if we don't see more violence as a result of this, I will be shocked.
Well, I think that's right. And I think it was Jim Acosta on CNN who they are marooning to literally the midnight hour, Matt, because Donald Trump hates him so much. had this goon Tim Burchett from Tennessee, a congressman from Tennessee, asking about it, and Burchett's like, "Well, I don't really know if any of them were violent." And Acosta actually said, "We're running the footage on air right now." Right? Like, we're watching it right now. And of course, to your point, this is, whether or not it's 1984 or Brave New World, right? We are living in these places where for these guys, they've been in the slipstream behind Trump for a decade now. And so we shouldn't have any expectation that between the people who are within the power structure and the people that were the most diehard of folks who supported him, that this is going to be the way it is. And I think it's also important to understand that Trump has a balancing act between the oligarchy that sat behind him and Elon Musk and Bezos and the bodies that make up the MAGA constituency, which are represented more by Steve Bannon, which is, I don't think any of the oligarchs care about the January 6th people one way or the other, but Bannon and his ilk certainly do.
Yeah, exactly. And look, the oligarchy situation could be a little dicey for Trump. He can't treat his oligarchs the way Putin treats his, which is to say, when they get on the line, they have unfortunate air crashes or fall out of windows. I mean, these guys do wield a lot of power. And what we saw recently, Elon turned against Sam Altman, who's the AI guy, because Altman was fighting with him over Trump.
Look, and he was at the White House, right? He was doing a press conference and it was at the Roosevelt Room or wherever it was. And Elon doesn't like getting anybody else in his spotlight.
Exactly. And so, he in his childish way was attacking Altman on X. And so there could be these internecine battles either between the oligarchs and the MAGA true believers, as you were saying, or between the oligarchs themselves. And that could get tricky for Trump once we're out of this initial honeymoon period. Every new president gets a honeymoon where they think that they have just swept to a Reagan style victory, even though they haven't. And every president overinterprets that victory. Certainly Biden did, Barack Obama did, Bill Clinton did. They all overreach, and then they have a comeuppance, and we're going to have to see what that looks like for Trump.
Let me ask you about the AI stuff for a second. $500 billion in conjunction with, as you said, with Sam Altman, I think at least one foreign wealth fund and a bunch of other things. And Trump said, this would create 100,000 jobs. But let me ask you, as someone who understands policy as well as politics, um, how do average Americans, individual Americans, see stuff like this? Because obviously AI has enormous implications for everything. Um, but do you think policy wise that pushing forward like this without any guardrails, as President Clinton did in the mid 90s, basically leaving the internet open to develop as it would, and now we've seen where it is, is that a good idea? And B, when or if do regular Americans, right, working class Americans, middle class, even upper middle class Americans, ever see the benefit of that outside of, maybe some incredible, cancer stuff that, again, if you can't get health insurance, what difference does it make anyway?
Right. It's a great question. And I think the analogy to the 90s is dead on, because what we were doing in the 90s was uh, we were faced with a world where America stood alone. It was a unipolar world. Russia was on its back. China had not risen yet. Europe was basically moribund. And all of the technology benefits were flowing to us. Our economy was booming. The Republicans in the Senate, literally, this is true, were complaining about out of control surpluses. And so we looked completely untouchable. And what we all, and I'm not even going to blame Bill Clinton, we all pushed for was we knew the world was opening, the world was flattening, as Thomas Friedman wrote, and that we thought that America could dominate that world and that we could, we would outsource the making of socks to China. And by doing so, we would ensure that China kind of came into our sphere of influence and that it would work out for us. And we were wrong about that. We were wrong about the implications of technology on the American workforce. We're certainly wrong about the implications of trade. Whether we could have held back that tide or not is unclear, but we didn't get it right. And the real question, I think, around AI, especially right now, is are they getting that wrong again? Because already on a recent earnings call, the CEO of Google said that 20% of their programming was being done by AI like 6 months ago. If you don't think that that these companies are going to start replacing people with AI in as quickly as they possibly can, you're nuts. Now, you may not care that they're replacing programmers at Google; those are higher income people, but that's going to affect all kinds of people. The number one job for Black women in the United States is cashier. And cashiers, we all know this, they're going away. Like, so the implications for the 21st century technology revolution, which is going to be driven by AI and quantum computing, could be great in some ways, but they could be very, very scary and disruptive for a whole bunch of workers.
So you've probably been in a similar situation to this. And I remember, gosh, it's probably 15, 16 years ago now, Matt, when I worked at a PR firm in Sacramento, California, and we were doing a public affairs thing about some bill, who knows what it was. And we had to write 25 different letters to some member of the legislature. And so it's me and a vice president and three or four account executives with a thesaurus trying to come up with 25 distinct different letters that we could have these people sign that could then be emailed in, and they couldn't look like each other. And it was just this time consuming process because, of course, as you know, like after you get past the fourth one, you're running out of words, right? Now you could type that into Chat GPT and it would spit out 25 completely different letters on message with one account executive, no other account executives, no senior VP, no managing director.
Exactly. I mean, just last night, I teach a class at a Washington program here, a college class, and we had as our guest a woman named Sarah Hurwitz who wrote speeches for the Obamas. And she said that one of her speechwriting colleagues put into ChatGPT a prompt, write a speech in the style of the president, and told her that it was better than 90% of the speechwriters in the United States. And speechwriting is a high order skill, as you know.
Right.
So is it better than the top 10%? No. But those 90% of people, those jobs are in real danger.
This is not the first time in history, certainly even in recent human history, and I'll call that say the last 150 years. In England, right, we had the Industrial Revolution that came here. We had automation, we had the assembly line. Then we start to get into more, as you said, computing. Now less people can do more work. That's always been a trend. But you mentioned that the mid 90s, right, which was not just the internet, but also significant outsourcing. What what can we learn, or what should we try and learn from those examples to prevent the massive economic, social, cultural dislocation that is coming?
That's all right from a historical perspective, but obviously we weren't around when the Industrial Revolution happened and the horsewhip manufacturers went out of business. But we were around when this all happened in the kind of tech revolution of the 90s and then the opening of trade. And I think the big lessons are, first of all, you got to think ahead about preparing the workforce of the future. And one of the things that we just didn't anticipate, first of all, was the incredible decline in manufacturing, not just low skill manufacturing, but high skill manufacturing. That would all just be sucked right out. Uh, and not only that it was going offshore, but that it was becoming robotic. So even the guys making cars, who are very high skill manufacturing, many of them would be replaced by technology. And I think you could see in other transitions, like the transition to cleaner energy, where we moved away from coal, we were scrambling to backfill things that we didn't prepare for. So, like, let's turn coal miners into coders. That was a thing for a while, about 10, 15 years ago. And it just seemed idiotic. I mean, we had not
And it
prepared
is.
these people or these communities exactly for those jobs. So if we can now see this AI revolution coming very, very clearly, and we better be thinking about education at every level, starting in grade school. And the way that we think about jobs in America has got to change. I don't have the answers to that, but I do know that if we're not thinking about it right now, before it happens, we're going to be completely screwed when it does.
And I think that's why we need, I'm not a fan of 5-year plans or, communist China style industrial policy, but it does seem that somebody has to set that kind of path. And we really haven't had that in a long time. I mean, you could say that the Clinton administration did that, right? They said we're going to open up everything, right? and created enormous amount of wealth, created entirely new economies, not only in Mexico, Vietnam, India, China, all these other places. Now, what are we gonna do with all the people, Matt, is my question, right? Like, if you have, 25, 30 million jobs, just to make it easy, right? Or 10 million jobs, just to make the math easy. What do 10 million people do if you don't need them? If you don't need them to go to work?
I don't know. Now, I will say this, the techno pessimists were wrong on some level before. So, for example, uh, when the ATM machine was introduced in the 90s, everyone said, well, that's the end of bank tellers. There are now more bank tellers in America than there were at the at the launch of the ATM revolution because bank tellers do a different job. So, at least until now, we have been able to, over time and through a lot of pain, transition from one kind of job, agricultural to industrial, to another. But we may be at a point in our development as a species where we are running out of places for people to go. And I don't know if AI is going to be so powerful that it literally wipes out jobs in ways that can't be replaced. And that would cause dis- social disruption. Truly, this is a Trump phrase, but this is actually true here, the likes of which we have never seen. And it's something that I think we all need to really be thinking about.
And I think too that, we are men of a certain age. We are lucky enough to occupy a particular space in the world, in America. But there are plenty of guys and women our age for whom, if their job went away at this moment, the idea of finding a comparable one, or anyone at all, would be difficult. And the idea that you're now going to be completely retrained at 50 years of age, it's not to say it's not possible, but it just becomes, I think, that much more difficult just because, father time marches on. And I think that's where, we get wrapped up, or the Trump people have been so good about keeping us wrapped up in culture wars. Frankly, the Democrats have walked into those more than enough, that we don't focus on the things that matter. It's, oh, let's not worry about this because TikTok's going away, right? Let's not worry about that because TikTok's going away. It's easy to deflect these things. And then, of course, you see, and I go back years on this, when you see the people in Congress who are deciding these things, it is a gerontocracy, not just for Democrats, but for Republicans too. Most of them don't understand Facebook. Most of them never did. And so now you're asking people who are older than you and me by a decade or two or even three to make policy, industrial, technological, economic decisions based on a world that they happen to occupy but can't possibly understand.
That's exactly right. I mean, who could forget? I think it was Chuck Grassley
Yes.
describing the internet as a series of tubes. Um, so they have no clue. And Congress is so unbelievably broken. They can barely keep the lights on, literally, in the government. Asking them to think about the economy of the future when this unknown robotic technology takes over everybody's jobs is, laughably beyond their capability. But I don't know who's going to do it if the government doesn't. I mean, it's very clear now that Trump wants to take off all of the brakes and just barrel forward to whatever comes. The dangers are way beyond just what it can do to the workforce. Of course, it could allow bad actors to develop bioweapons that could wipe out humanity. I mean, there's all kinds of really bad things that could happen from the AI revolution.
And the guys sitting behind Trump on Monday are already sort of low rate Bond villains to begin with.
Exactly. Right. So all of this is to say we have a gigantic problem coming. And, Jake Sullivan, in one of his last speeches as Biden's national security advisor, gave a big set of remarks about this. He ended by saying that, he's basically optimistic and that there's all this promise, which is true. But that came after a long litany of things that could go very, very wrong for the world. And the idea now that this is going to be self-governed by industry because Trump has, every interest in just handing them the keys and letting them do whatever they want is really terrifying.
I want to go back to something you referenced offhandedly a little bit at the top, which was this idea of employees having to basically rat one another out. That he's put all these people who are related to DEI positions on leave in the process of firing them from the federal government. But he's also told them that they have 10 days to root out any sort of sub rosa DEI efforts that are in there, right? That might have been set up under a different name or whatever it is. But to me, look, if you work for a partisan administration as a political appointee, as both you and I have, there's an expectation that you are going to go along with the administration's policies, what the president puts forward, because that's your job. If you're a bureaucrat, it's a little bit different. But now, if you start the process on the first week of asking people basically to inform on one another, and then you think about the idea of Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense, now all of these people are going to be based not on whether or not they're even the same party or whatever, but political reliability, which is a very sort of Soviet thought, which is I'm a lieutenant, I want to be a captain, right? My captain doesn't like Trump. I've heard him say bad things about Trump. I could probably be the company commander. I mean, that doesn't seem too far-fetched.
Not in the least. I mean, this is all straight out of the authoritarian playbook. Everything that Trump is doing is, and I don't, he hasn't read the playbook. It's not like he sits around reading political science books about how democracies die. He
Right.
doesn't know that he's doing this uh, as a kind of proto-Soviet, but he certainly is. And his instincts are all in this direction, which is demand loyalty, and that is the only value. Loyalty is it. It isn't competence. It isn't public mindedness. It is loyalty. And so, to your point, he is putting in place all kinds of uh, levers that people can pull to move up the ranks by maximizing their loyalty and stepping on or pushing aside people who are just trying to do their jobs, serve the public, protect us, do whatever it is that they're doing. And that is really, really dangerous. And I think even if our democracy survives Trump, which is to say we have another election that he doesn't run in because he's barred by the Constitution, although he's barred by an amendment to the Constitution, which he apparently doesn't think count because he didn't like
Right.
the 14th Amendment, as we saw last week. Um, but presuming he doesn't run again and that there's an election and it's run properly, uh, American democracy will survive. But he will have broken things that are incredibly hard to repair, including the federal workforce. And while bureaucrats get a bad rap in the aggregate, if you think about what they do in particular, protecting our food supply, protecting air travel, keeping the parks running,
Social security checks.
getting your social security checks, not to mention the 2 million men and women under arms that are protecting the United States and are now reporting to a kind of Soviet style leader in the Defense Department, or probably will be by next week. That's a really scary proposition.
Okay, so let me bring it down to a place you've spent most of your professional career, Matt. Like, where are Democrats? Where do they go from here?
I mean, at the moment, we're still in the wilderness, picking through the rubble. Pick your metaphor, but
Right.
it's pretty grim. As Ezra Klein joked recently, any room with two Democrats is a postmortem at the moment. That that is what is happening. But I think you get reporters ask me this all the time, like, what are Democrats thinking? What are they doing? And the fact is, there's no such thing. We don't, when you're a party without a leader, and this is no shade on Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader in the House, or Chuck Schumer in the Senate, uh, they're not the leaders of the party. It's not their job. They don't have the ability to do that from their current position. We don't have a leader, and we're not going to have a leader until we nominate somebody for president in like 3.5 years. So we've got a long period of kind of collective thinking to do. And a lot of that thinking is going to be divergent. People are going to have very different ideas. They already do. And the real question for our party is, can we converge around a set of ideas that are winning by the time it's important for us to get going on that? That's the kind of bad news. The good
Sure.
news is that there is an effort underway by a lot of us, including us at Third Way, to start to think this through. And we're putting out some papers. We're going to have convenings. We're going to do a whole bunch of things. We have a big project underway to build infrastructure on the center left, because our view is that one of the things that went wrong, leaving aside the things that were unique to 2024, Biden's age, the way he dropped out, all of that stuff, the things that went wrong in 24 that could come back and hurt us again, many of them are attributable to the fact that our party has drifted way, way too far to the left. And I mean, if you take one glance at that New York Times map showing the rightward pointing red arrows, it's just inescapable conclusion that people think that we're too far left. And all of our polling shows that as well. So in our view, the most important thing for Democrats to do is get a grip on that. Think about what the offer is that we're going to be making to people about this new economy that we were discussing, and about the way that they live their lives and the culture in which they live. And fundamentally, and most importantly, win the battle of reasonableness. When people look at the two parties, they will vote for the party they think is less nuts, is more reasonable. And we thought it was impossible to lose that battle to Donald Trump because he is so manifestly insane. But we did. He came across as more reasonable, and we have just got to confront that fact.
I'm glad to hear that. I wrote something today that's up on Substack now that I thought that both humility and candor are enormously important right now. That, all of us who have been doing this most of our lives or professionally thought we know so much, thought we knew how to do this, and we've lost to this guy twice now. The other part is candor. Why? Why did we lose? Why did we? You can go back to particular candidates, you can go back to dynamics of a given year or economy or whatever. But the truth is, from my perspective, and I heard this from an activist in Minnesota, when she went door to door, she felt like the Democratic Party didn't have standing, even in neighborhoods where there should be no other option. And for me, that's one thing too, Matt, is yes, there are the people who voted for Trump. And if you tell them to F off every day because it makes you feel better, you're not bringing those people back to the tent. And I think there needs to be a lot of understanding and listening to those 5 million people who chose to sit out, given they knew the consequences of their actions. And that to me is one of those things where if you're going to put your nose in the air and say, you people are too stupid for me to even deal with, as you mentioned just a minute ago, then winning is really not what you're trying to do. And think about this. You could probably appreciate this. In marriage, you can be right or you can be married. You have to have a choice. In campaigns, you can be pure or you can win, but you rarely have both.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, the extremists of our party, uh, in your metaphor, are all divorced because they just don't give. They don't give a
Often
crap.
from reality.
Exactly. I mean, they literally say this out loud. There are people in the Progressive Caucus of the House who have said they would rather be in a more progressive Democratic caucus than in the majority. That's a choice. I mean, that they have very clearly made. In my view, that choice is insane, like completely bonkers, totally misunderstands how anything works in Washington, how they make people's lives better, how they arrive at the destination they think they're trying to get to.
And look, I mean, politics, right? Campaigns very often are black and white. That is the nature. Yes or no, them or us, right and wrong, good and evil, whatever it is. But governing is by definition shades of gray, and that's where you want it. And what we're not seeing now, right? When you lose elections, right, you get a 6-3 Supreme Court majority. You get a situation where, and we talked about this all the way back in August in Chicago, where come 2032, you could have 16 congressional seats that are currently in blue states that are now going to be in red states, right? We've talked about, maybe you and I have talked about how many legislative seats went by the wayside over the course of the last 10 or 15 years. And so at some point you have to say, well, we do want to win. Right? We actually do want to win, because if you don't, then what's the point of this? And to paraphrase George Patton, if you don't want to win, then get out of the way.
Amen to that. But there are people in politics that apparently don't want to win. I mean, we saw this first actually with the Tea Party, where they fumbled away like 7 winnable Senate races, thank God, by nominating fruitcakes in, either blue or purple states, and Democrats were able to easily beat them. Where had they nominated a moderator or somebody more reasonable, they would have won those. That was the first sign that the radicals don't give a crap about winning. We're now seeing it very clearly on the left, and we've fumbled away all kinds of House seats, doing not all kinds, but a number of House seats by nominating people that couldn't win. But the bigger problem for us is that the radicals are pushing our national leaders to do things that are unsustainable. And they are defining what it means to be a Democrat in ways that make it very difficult, even for moderates, to win in tough places. So that if that doesn't change, if we are not brought up short by losing to Donald Trump for a second time, and we don't change the way that we're approaching these things, this wilderness period is going to last for a really long time.
I was just watching or rewatching, I should say, Charlie Wilson's War, which is a great movie. It's a great
Great
book
movie.
too.
Yeah.
And Tom Hanks plays Charlie Wilson, a conservative Democrat from East Texas. He'd probably be a Republican today,
Oh, for
right?
sure he would. Yeah.
But what did he say? The people in my district want God and to be left alone, right? Like that's true of East Texas today.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's one of those things I think you've really hit the nail on the head is Democrats have to be what they need to be to win in the places they're in. John Tester cannot run the same race as Chuck Schumer in New York, nor should anyone have any expectation that he could or should.
I mean, you have Democrats celebrating that Joe Manchin is no longer in the Senate. I mean, Joe Manchin was replaced by a MAGA Republican
With a dog.
with a dog. So the idea that that's better, the guy that voted for all, by definition, literally all of the bills that passed the Senate, that Biden got done, on a party line vote, he put together the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the biggest investment in climate and clean energy ever. He did a whole bunch of things that Democrats should be standing up and applauding. He was right about the things that Democrats were mad at him about when it came to the size of the Recovery Act, when it came to permitting reform. Joe Manchin was right about a lot of things, and yet people on the left are happy that he's gone. That is the very essence of cutting off your nose to spite your face in politics.
Well, and as I've written before, and I might have said to the folks listening and watching, I mean, I'm not a Republican anymore. I'm not a Democrat, not going to be a Democrat, but I got caught up in that stuff, right? I got by, I guess, call it gravitational pull. I got pulled into the online left. Each of their outrages, Matt, became my outrage. And so, when I talk about humility and candor, like I'm looking at myself first, if that makes sense, which is like, wait. What was I doing? And not only that, I think that for a lot of us in that same position, call it never Trump, what happened was that we eroded our credibility with the very group of people we needed to stay away from Trump. And they said, well, if you guys are just the same as them, like it doesn't do it for me anymore.
Yeah, you became a Democrat, you know. uh, Look,
Great.
I hear you on the humility. Like my big thing is I thought Harris was going to win. And, I woke up the next day thinking like, why did I think that? That was completely crazy, and why did I think Tim Walz was the right guy? And look, I think to be fair to both of us, there's pretty good reasons for the things that we did. Harris, at least in the first half of her short campaign, did run the way we had hoped she would. But ultimately, she was dragged down by some things she couldn't control for sure. And she ran a pretty good race, but she became very careful and very concerned about offending people on the left in ways that, in retrospect, made it impossible for her to win.
Look, that's the one thing too, is that, as you know this as well, maybe better than I do. Campaigns are dynamic. They're supposed to be dynamic. The Brat Summer stuff right up through the convention was, I think, generating a lot of enthusiasm, a
Yeah.
lot of excitement. It was a great convention. And then, as you said, as soon as they got through the debate, it was like they went into the prevent defense,
Yep,
right?
totally.
And they were playing not to lose as opposed to win and not pressing the advantages. And look, as you know, as a former Republican, for us, it's just win, baby, right? And we would have put the pedal to the metal and just continued to keep Trump on his back foot and looking stupid. And I think when Tim Walz called them weird, I think there was a real, that had the ability to go to your point about like, who do I really want to spend more time with or I want to deal with, the weird people or the not weird people? And listen, we must be again clear and candid. The Trump people did a masterful job of making Kamala Harris and the Democrats look weird and out of touch with the culture and society in those few weeks that really mattered.
I mean, couldn't agree more. And say what you will about their attack on transgender kids, which was awful on many levels and vicious, and has really made life horrible for a lot of people, and it's morally repugnant. However, uh, that ad, "She's for they, them, and he's for you,"
Right.
that may be the greatest ad tagline I've ever heard. And when I heard it, I thought, "Oh my god, like we could be in trouble."
As I've said before, I was sitting either in Michigan or in North Carolina in like a Hampton Inn or wherever I was canvassing that. And I'm sitting there eating a bowl of cereal and I saw the ad for the first time, Matt. I'm like, that's not good. That
That's
is
really
not
bad.
good.
Yeah.
Right. And listen, and you lived through Willie Horton,
Yeah,
right? So you
exactly.
know, and I
Oh,
was on
yeah.
the '04 Bush campaign when Chris LaCivita, the guy who created the trans ad, created the Swift boat ad against John Kerry, right? Like,
Yep.
yes, most 99.999% of ads don't matter. Sometimes they do. And when they do, they really do. All right, Matt, I know you have to run. Before we let you go, where can we find you and where can we find Third Way's work?
Third Way is thirdway.org. I am still on X, I guess, for the next little while at Third Way Matt B, and it's the same Third Way Matt B on Blue Sky.
Awesome. As always, gang, you can find me still on Twitter, on Says Us, and on TikTok, all of these things for as long as they last, at Reed Galen, on Threads and Instagram, at Reed_Galen USA, and over on Substack at The Homefront. I hope you will join and subscribe. Matt Bennett, thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Love the home front. Everyone should read it every day.
I love that too. Everybody else, we'll see you next time.